Welcome back, everyone. It's good to see you all. You are listening to United Public Radio through a glass darkly radio. The intro music was Mark of the Doomslayer by Karl at White Bat Audio. And once again, this is one of my favorite recurring guests, Dr. John Brandenburg. He's a plasma physicist. He did his graduate work in California at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in controlled plasmas for fusion power and has worked in defense, energy, and space research. Dr. Brandenburg was also part of the Clementine mission to the moon, which discovered water at the moon's poles. However, the focus of Dr. Brandenburg's scientific career has been to complete the great effort of Einstein to unify the two long-range forces of nature, gravity and electromagnetism. Dr. Brandenburg, John, welcome
Sean,
back.
always a pleasure and honor to be on your show.
All right, so we're gonna get into some ancient history here. Not ancient, but 20th century, early 20th century history. And we're gonna kind of talk about the origin of fusion power and
Yes.
warp drives. And it kind of starts a little bit way back. It involves some Yahtzees. I'm saying that deliberately so we don't get shut down in the first few minutes because I used a big bad word, but which we can use later. But we can talk about the infamous Hans Kammler, which we'll eventually get to that point. So with that, Dr. Brandenburg, welcome. And where do we begin?
Well, we begin at roughly the turn of the 19th century. A number of things were happening. Just like the turn of our millennium created a lot of excitement and creative boldness. Same thing happened then. People were writing about anti-gravity. John Jacob Astor IV wrote a novel where he had something called apergy that was basically anti-gravity. And he unfortunately got killed in the Titanic disaster. But Einstein was working on his theory of relativity. E equals mc squared was his first theory of relativity. And about that time, Madame Curie discovered, the radioactivity of radium and realized that she was seeing atomic energy being released. E equals mc squared could explain how the radium could glow in the dark, and just glow in the dark for decades. So a lot of exciting things were happening, and because you got to remember at that time they did not even know what made the sun burn and the stars.
Mm-hmm.
The sun would rise every morning, it would set, the stars would come out, and nobody knew what kept the starlight and the sunlight, what produced that energy. There were various ideas. Well, it was a big lump of coal, but unfortunately, there's no air in space. They didn't understand that at those days. So they just scientists typically, if they can't explain something, they just don't talk about it. So, but Madame Curie found that radium was emitting all of this energy, and then Einstein, about 1915, published his theory of relativity, where it included the famous equation E equals mc squared. He showed that matter, mass, could be converted directly into energy, and this explained how radium could keep putting out all this energy, even though it was a complete vacuum, it wasn't burning anything. So suddenly they started thinking, oh, the sun works because of nuclear energy. They figured out there was a nucleus and an atom, and so So they started really thinking about this. And there was a guy named Hans Bethe who figured out that using E equals mc squared, you could make hydrogen into helium, and that would release energy. You take 4 hydrogens basically and combine them and get a helium nucleus. And the helium nucleus weighs slightly less than the 4 atoms, 4 hydrogens you started out with, and that energy, that missing mass, is turned into energy, which makes the sun burn and all the stars. So they figured that out. He was a very clever fellow. He's German. And then Einstein also figured out then his second theory of relativity. He figured out gravity, and his theory, space-time. And so that he ended up figuring out the theory that predicts black holes and the big. And it also showed that you could bend starlight, which is electromagnetism, with gravity. And he got very excited about this because he thought it, well, put it this way. If you have 2 charges, a negative and a positive, or 2 positive charges out in space, they repel each other with a force that's due to the, that you can calculate due to the product of their charges and square of the distance between them. It follows the inverse square law. Gravity follows the same law mathematically. So he said, aha, gravity and electromagnetism, which both forces reach across the universe, must be somehow related. So he became obsessed with this idea, and he formed what was called the unified field theory effort. Interestingly enough, he said the universe is almost all hydrogen, protons and electrons, a heavy positive charge and a light negative charge. And we know the stars make more complicated nuclei, but it's basically just hydrogen out there. So we'll call the other atoms just details, and we'll just concentrate on, like at the Big Bang, 99% of the matter in the universe that we know of was just hydrogen. And later condensed into stars and galaxies, and the galaxies condensed into clouds of stars, and they started making more complicated nuclei with energy. And stars, like the sun, only make helium, but bigger, heavier stars, which are big clouds of gas, and they compress in their cores to high temperature and high density, high pressure. The gas, they get, the heavier and bigger the star is, the more heat and pressure it generates inside its core. So you can start burning helium and make, when you burn helium, you can actually get energy from burning the helium, and the helium produces oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen, the things that we're made out of. So the third, there's hydrogen, and then helium is the next most abundant element, and then carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen are the next group of elements that are very common in the universe. And guess what we're made out of? We're made out of hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, pretty much. And of course, hydrogen combined with oxygen makes water. And so nobody who knows what they're doing in this universe should ever run out of oxygen or water. If they do, they're being lazy. Because water, believe it or not, water is the most common chemical in the universe. So they had, but anyway, Einstein was obsessed with unifying the fields. And so his investigations kind of split from being, kind of atomic energy to field theory. And he became just concentrated on field theory. He'd already figured out what made the stars work. Now he was interested on if gravity could bend light, which is electromagnetism, could electromagnetism, light, bend gravity? So he wanted the other shoe to drop. If you could control light with gravity, could you control gravity with light? Electromagnetism. So he called this quest the unified field theory problem. And Einstein was not only a brilliant physicist, he was also a really smart guy. Because in the meantime, Hitler had come to power in Germany. And he had been preparing for this by banking money from his books. He was making a lot of money writing books about atomic energy and stuff. So he banked it all in the United States. So when Hitler came to power in Germany, he got out of Germany. He decided to take a nice vacation in America with his entire family and his secretary, who was Jewish. So not only was Einstein a brilliant physicist, but he was a smart guy. He had street smarts. He was a survivor. So he came to the United States and worked at a place called the Princeton Institute for Advanced Study, where they, gave him a nice office and a salary. And he then kept working on his unified field theory. Now, in the meantime, in Germany, a guy named Kaluza, who was German, and another guy who was named Klein, who is Swedish, they came up with this interesting theory. If you have four space-time dimensions, you have X, Y, Z, back and forth, front and back, up and down, plus time, and you say space-time is like that, and only it's a rubber sheet. It's made out of these four dimensions, and you let it relax to a state of a minimum energy, you get Einstein's equation for gravity, general relativity, black holes and everything. So Kaluza and Klein, beginning with Kaluza, found that if you added a fifth dimension, the fifth dimension is like the thumb on your hand. It makes everything possible. You notice the thumbs taken together point in opposite directions. All of the four fingers point in the same direction. So the thumb is at right angles to the rest. And if you have a hand with only four fingers on it, you're up a creek. But if you got thumbs, suddenly you can do anything. And so the fifth dimension, if you add it to the four dimensions of space-time, suddenly you have a working hand with a thumb, theoretically. You can unify gravity and electromagnetism mathematically with this fifth dimension, the fifth finger, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Also the big finger. So, by the way, in Brazil, never give the thumbs up sign. That's considered the equivalent of flipping the bird in America and most of Europe, by the way.
Yep, sit on it and spin. Right.
Sit on it and spin, is as the Portuguese say in their typical fashion. So they could take mathematically 5 dimensions, and then suddenly the equations of gravity and electromagnetism could be unified mathematically. Now, what is this hidden? And Klein figured out it had to be a hidden dimension. It couldn't be like the other ones. Just like the thumb has to be shorter than the rest of the fingers, this one is shorter. And in fact, it cancels. The thumbs cancel. The fingers all point in the same direction, but the thumbs actually cancel their direction. So, what happened? People couldn't figure out what the fifth dimension was. When Einstein read this, they sent him the article. They couldn't get it published. So, Kaluza sent it to Einstein. Einstein read it, says, this is nonsense. Fifth dimension's fifth dimension, he says. What is it? What is it? What does it do? But after thinking about it, he says, well, the math sure looks like it works out. If the math works, there's got to be something to it. So he sent it. He wrote a note to this big scientific journal. He attached it. In those days, they didn't have email or anything like that. They sent everything by snail mail. He writes a note and attaches it, he staples it onto this article, sends it into the journal and says, this thing is nonsense, but you should publish it anyway. Because the math is so neat. And the equations for electromagnetism were called Maxwell's equations. They're invented by the Scotsman, James Clerk Maxwell. When you put this fifth dimension system together, the equations of gravity from Einstein's theory of general relativity fall out exactly. And the equations of Maxwell, electromagnetism, fall out also. And they're joined properly. So electromagnetism can create mass for the gravity theory. Now, that's pretty neat. All you do is add a thumb to your coordinate system, a special fifth finger, and all this, you can explain most of what you see in the universe, because the forces that run the nucleus, atomic forces, those nuclear forces, they're very short range. They don't reach across. They're important in the galaxy because they make the stars make energy. But electromagnetism light goes from one end of the universe to the other, and so does gravity. They're the two long-range forces of nature. So Einstein gradually decided that this fifth dimension approach was good. By this time, he's in the United States. Here's what also happened. One of the friends of Einstein was this lady named Lisa Meitner. She was Jewish. She was Austrian. And in those days, women scientists were very rare. But she was so smart. She got respect. Not only that, quite frankly, she was a babe. This probably helped her become much more persuasive. So these two Germans, she's working with this guy named Hahn, and they're shooting neutrons, a nuclear particle, at pieces of uranium. And the pieces of uranium get hot, and they start putting out more neutrons than they put in. She analyzes this and realizes they're splitting the atoms and it's releasing energy. Instead of building up nuclei more and more complicated, from like hydrogen and helium, uranium is at the other end, super heavy. If you split them, you also get energy. The only thing, as it turns out, if you split it or join it, doesn't give you anything, is iron in the middle. Iron's in the middle. That's why iron is important. Stars that burn up all their nuclear fuel end up with a heart of iron. And then they explode. And what's left of them then collapses into a black hole. Anyway, Meitner figured this all out. She figured out that you could get energy from splitting uranium atoms and published it. This is read by a guy named Robert Oppenheimer. in the United States. Oppenheimer gets her article and in an afternoon figures out he can build an atomic bomb. It was that quick because he was a really smart guy too.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened, Oppenheimer started talking to a bunch of people, other physicists, and physicists were fleeing, Jewish physicists were fleeing Europe because of the Nazis. The rumors that there was going to be a Holocaust were spreading. So if you had money and you were Jewish and were smart, you got out. Two of the guys who got out was a guy named Szilard. Don't hear much about him, but Edward Teller was the other guy. Teller and Szilard get together, take the article by Meitner, realize you could build an atomic bomb. They bring the letter to Einstein. Say, Al, sign this letter. We got friends in the White House. We can get in front of him in the White House. America must start an atomic bomb program. Otherwise, the Germans will we're going to have a war. By the way, by this point, you didn't need to be a rocket scientist or a nuclear physicist to figure out we were going to have another war. And
Mm-hmm.
this one was going to be worse than World War I, much worse. So America was not, the war started. Well, here, let me tell you how the British government, they saw this coming. What they did in Britain, they had a film, national studio. They produced a movie called Things to Come. It's from part of a title of an H.G. Wells story. H.G. Wells, War of the Worlds guy. He wrote another novel called The Shape of Things to Come, which predicted a great world war where civilization would almost perish. We're talking about planes dropping poison gas on cities and releasing bacteriological warfare to kill whoever survives that. That was all in his book.
Mm-hmm.
The British National Film Board in 1937, I believe, can read the handwriting on the wall. The Brits are smart about stuff like this. They decide, okay, we got to make a movie that'll prepare our people for the coming war. So they make a movie called Things to Come. And parts of those movies look just like the London Blitz. You have German planes over London dropping all these bombs and all these anti-aircraft guns and things like this. And the war starts in 1940 in that movie and lasts until 1978. I mean, they were preparing their people for a long knockdown, drag out fight with the Germans. Raymond Massey is the star. I suggest everyone should watch that movie because that's what a prophetic science fiction movie looks like.
What was the title of it again called?
Things to Come.
Okay.
Look it up on Google with Raymond Massey. And in the movie, the Germans finally start dropping poison gas on the cities to kill everybody. And then finally, bacteriological warfare. So there's this plague that turns people into zombies walking down the street. And by this time, civilization has pretty much been reduced to ruins, even in Britain. They're still fighting in Europe. but this local kind of robber baron arises,
Mm-hmm.
and he says, if you see anybody walking like a zombie, just kill him, and he wipes out the plague because they just kill all of the people who get it, so they can't spread it. So that's how ruthless the British government felt people would have to be to get through this war. And anyway, you should see the movie. Civilization, by the way, does recover and then launches the first astronauts into outer space eventually. And civilization rebuilds. But in the meantime, they start the Manhattan Project. And the Manhattan Project gets all of these very talented scientists who are refugees from Europe, most of them Jewish. And they get the atomic bomb working just according to Lise Meitner's. And what's interesting is Lise Meitner did something else very interesting. Most people don't kind of ignore it. One of her students was a guy named Delbruck, a German guy. And he found out that you could bounce light off of light. If you fired two laser beams at each other, you could get the particles of light, the photons, to bounce off each other. Isn't that something? Because of quantum mechanics. Now, let me also tell you, she liked quantum mechanics. Einstein, quantum shranum, he didn't like quantum mechanics. He says, what is this Schrodinger's cat thing? The cat's in the box. It's either alive or dead. It's one or the other. How can it be in between? He says, God doesn't play dice with the universe. I have imaginary conversations with old Al Einstein. I said, yeah, Al, he doesn't play dice. Okay. God doesn't play dice. But Al, he owns a casino where dice is played. Al always responds to me, what are you, some kind of smart aleck telling me this? What are you doing? So anyway, it turns out this guy Delbruck is working for Meitner. Delbruck is not interested in physics, as it turns out. He wants to go into biology. So he figures out, using all his quantum mechanics, how biology, works, molecules and stuff. So he just walks away from this big discovery. So it's really kind of her discovery. So they get that published. And as it turns out, that's the secret to unifying gravity and electromagnetism. The quantum. You have to add the quantum mechanics to get the unified field theory to work. And I'll give you two examples.
Mm-hmm.
You have a black hole. Okay. Black hole starts, star burns out all its fuel. It collapses on itself. It crushes itself out of existence. All the matter just disappears into another dimension or something. All you're left with is gravity. A little pinpoint of gravity. Ultra strong fields. The fields are so strong, not even light can escape from. That's the black hole. Fine. That falls out of Einstein's theory. Then what happens? Stephen Hawking comes along. Hawking says, but space-time, he says, is full of quantum uncertainty, the Heisenberg uncertainty. There is no such thing as a vacuum because you have quantum particles appearing and disappearing, matter and antimatter. It's all constantly shaking, and it's just like, air in a room seems like it's still, but no, all the molecules are running around on the sub-microscopic scale, running into each other and everything. So what Stephen Hawking did is he added, kind of through the back door, quantum mechanics to gravity theory. Because he says gravity theory is about space-time. So what is space-time? Well, it's got to be quantum mechanical. So he puts a black hole in a bottle, pure gravity. It starts to evaporate into gamma rays. Gamma rays are electromagnetism. If you wait long enough, the black hole will actually evaporate, and finally, the smaller it gets, the faster it evaporates. So finally, it pops like a firecracker into pure gamma rays, pure electromagnetism. So you start with pure gravity, end up with pure electromagnetism. I see that. This is where kind of one of my pathways of theoretical thought began. I thought, oh my God, you can change gravity into pure electromagnetism. So I took that result and the result of Kaluza and Klein. By the way, the fifth dimension is charge. It's the charge of subatomic particles, plus and minus, just like the two thumbs. They're equal, they're opposite. And, you know, if you have like a hydrogen, a proton, and an electron, they only have one electric charge each. They can't get any bigger. They're the only stable subatomic particles there are. Even the neutron, which doesn't have any charge, put a bunch of neutrons in a box, look in there 10 minutes later, they're all hydrogen. They've split into protons and electrons. Neutrons pop like little firecrackers after 10 minutes.
Why is that?
What?
Why is that?
Ask Al. I don't know. It just is. Nature doesn't like stuff that's not charged, believe it or not. It likes subatomic particles that have charge. They got to be one way or the other. Boom, boom. None of this wishy-washy stuff. The wishy-washy stuff doesn't last. The charge stuff, it lasts. And it's peculiar. No one understands this. You know, the fact the proton, they say, is made out of 3 quarks, and I say, show me one of these quarks. They say, oh, we can't. They're invisible. They're like little unicorns running around in there, and they have to stay close to their house. They can't get out of their house. You can look in the window and see them. These little unicorns, these 3 little unicorns running around in the proton, but they can't go out. It's a little bit crazy. The proton is simultaneously a fundamental subatomic particle, and at the same time is made out of 3 particles that you can't see. It's like quantum mechanics, where things can be both waves and particles at the same time. It's the same thing. When you get into quantum mechanics, you have this, there may be ladies and children listening, so we say mindfuck kind of situations. When you ended up with quantum mechanics, you do that. So what Delbruck, working for Meitner, figured out was that if you run 2 photons into each other, 2 laser beams, it makes gravity, as it turns out. It makes gravity. So you start with pure electromagnetism, and you get some gravity out. Because the photons that come out, they are actually slightly heavier than when they went in. So it completes the cycle. You can take, Hawking said you can go from pure gravity to pure electromagnetism. Meitner actually had said you can go from pure electromagnetism and get pure gravity out of it. So I developed this theory called the gem theory. You can read it up. You can go on Google, just Google gem theory, gem unification theory, Brandenburg. I got a whole bunch of articles out. As it turns out, when you have two rocks out in space, one of them weighs, mass of one is 5 kilograms, the other one's mass is 2 kilograms, and they're separated by a distance of 5 meters, 5 yards roughly. By the way, the way to go between metric and English is just think in terms of yards, meters, and of course, you got water, pints a pound. Well, 2 pints makes a quart. A quart is a liter. So a liter is about 2 pounds. That's a kilogram. So there you got. It's an easy way to remember to go from metric to because it gives you mass and it gives you distance, and pretty much there's nothing else. Then time. By the way, you know what the second is? It's a human heartbeat.
Is it really?
Yes, it is. Resting heartbeat for a human being who's not watching the news, which can be upsetting lately, especially. You got to admit, not only did Trump dodge a big bullet, so did the country.
Country did. Yeah,
the country dodged a big bullet.
Yeah, we were about.
Look a lot.
We were about an.
If that bullet, God forbid, it actually gotten to its target, but instead, he dodged it. Okay, so the resting heartbeat of a human being, 60 beats per minute, 60 seconds. Check yourself. If you got a way to measure your pulse, if you sit there and just relax, it's about 60. And that's been the universal time. It's also the beat. In rock music, it's the beat is 1 second. It's also marching cadence. If you are into marching and drill in the Army, as I'm sure you were an expert at, Sean, when you were in the Army.
Yeah, it's about a second.
It's about a second. Boom, 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 boom. All right. So we have now a theory. Here is a simple way to explain the theory. You know that if you have a magnet, it can't pick up paper, but it can pick up a paper clip. Same if you comb your hair, which I used to have. You still got yours? If you comb your hair on a dry day, get static electricity, you can pick up pieces of paper. It's not a very strong force, but you can do it. You can't pick up the pieces of paper with a magnet, but you can pick up the paper clip. You can even pick up the paper clip with enough static electricity, but generally you'll get a big shock if you try that because the electricity starts jumping around because it's metal. So there's a third force. So those are the two main forces of electromagnetism. If you combine those forces, the electric and the magnetic, you get a third force in electromagnetism. It's the pressure of radiation. You can actually buy little things, they look like a little light bulb, shine a flashlight on them, they'll spin, even though there's no air.
Mm-hmm.
Pure electromagnetism causing this little turbine to spin. It's a force, but there's no electric field you can measure. There's no magnetic field you can measure. It's all microscopic. It's quantum. So you can make 3 different forces from electromagnetism. The way you relate gravity and electromagnetism is through that third force, the force of radiation pressure. That's where the force of gravity and here's another way. If you go up on the space station, you have a dark box. You put 2 white hot ball bearings in there. You're in weightlessness. They will actually repel each other due to radiation pressure. The light from each of them will push against the other. They'll push each other apart with an inverse square law force. The farther they get away from each other, the weaker the force. Now, so that's a force of repulsion. Now, if you take 2 ball bearings and soak them in liquid nitrogen, so they're really cold, put them in a box, heat the box with electricity. So say it's white hot. You're in the space station, you got this white hot box, you put these 2 ball bearings in there that are really cold, they'll attract one another with an inverse square law attraction, just like gravity. And the reason is because the light is coming from all directions, pressing on the ball bearings, but in the direction of the other ball bearing. If you stand on one ball bearing, what you see is a dark spot. And the other ball bearing, if you stand on it, you see another dark spot. And that causes shadowing. There's less radiation pressure coming from those dark spots because they're dark. So the radiation pressure on the other side of the ball bearings pushes them together with a 1/r² force, just like gravity. So I took all of these ideas mathematically and added the 5th dimensional of Kaluza and Klein and came up with the gem theory. Now, one of the triumphs of the gem theory, by the way, we'll go back to 2 rocks in space. One is 2 kilograms, the other is 5 kilograms. They're separated by a yard, a meter, roughly a meter in space. The force between them you can calculate by taking the mass of one, 2 kilograms, times the mass of the other, 5 kilograms. You get 10 kilograms squared, divided by the distance between them, which is just 1 meter, times a constant invented by Isaac Newton. It's the Newton gravitation constant, big G. My theory predicts the value of big G to within a part per 10,000, and nobody else can do it. Sean, you're talking to a guy who found the Mars ocean. There used to be an ocean on Mars. You can look it up on Wikipedia. I'm reference number 1. You think NASA ever gives me credit? No.
Well, they may have already discovered it. They've just been lying about it before you discovered it. For all you know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Perfectly possible. I am the Voltmart of Mars. He who must not be named on Mars because of the dead. I helped discover a dead civilization there. So I also invented this formula for big G. I took it to a scientific conference and presented it. They gave me, this was a string theory conference. I'll get into string theory in just a moment. The string theory conference. And I presented this, you do what's called a poster session where instead of standing up at a podium, that's only for high rollers, important people, gray-bearded professors with beards that reached down to their waist. I wasn't that. I did have a very cute girlfriend along with me. That helped. That got me a lot of attention. She got a lot of attention. She's standing. But anyway, you put your paper as view graphs, just printed up on this big bulletin board. And you stand in front of that and you explain it to people. And, it's called a poster session. You're presenting a poster. So I presented this formula for Big G. Sean, these string theory physicists trying to come up with a theory for everything, they paid me the ultimate compliment at this meeting. They got mad at me. One guy comes up to me. In fact, I noticed a crowd gathering. A crowd followed him up to my poster. It's just like my high school I went to. If you got out of class in the afternoon, you notice a crowd of people in the parking lot, student parking lot, you knew there was a fight. Everybody wanted to watch. In there, there'd be two people duking. I grew up in a rough town. And this guy comes up to my poster session. He points his finger at me. He says, "Your numbers lie." Said, "You've hidden Big G on this side of the equation and made it pop out on the other." It was all there in writing, equations. So I said, "Well, there it is. There's the formula. Show me where Big G is on this side of the equation so I can make it pop out on the other side." And his angry face slowly lost all its anger. And then he just turned and walked away. And I said, "Come back here, you motherfucker, coward." No, I didn't say that to him. My girlfriend was standing.
And by the way, for folks who are just joining us, you're listening to Through a Glass Darkly Radio on United Public Radio.
So
go, John. Sorry.
Then this other graybeard, long graybeard, comes up. He starts looking at my poster. You'd think he was a customs official and I'm trying to smuggle something across the border. He's looking at every sheet. And after about 5 minutes, I'm standing there with my girlfriend. And she says, and I say to him, "Sir, you need me to walk you through this? He just turns to me and just glares at me. And he says, "No, I can read it for myself." All right. Well, and by this time, there's a crowd of about 30 students, mostly younger physicists and students, watching all of this, just like my high school parking lot after school. Some scores getting settled. And they hung around and looked at my theory. String theory, by the way, they've spent probably about $2 or $3 billion on it. It has produced nothing, nada. I mean, they have big particle accelerators. They could test predictions from string theory that they were coming up with. They'd make predictions, nothing. They didn't see anything. It is completely, it's la la land. It's string theory. I'll explain in a minute what it's based on. String theory is like given at Thanksgiving, giving the chef a big jug of nice cooking wine to cook the turkey in. After about 3 hours, you don't smell the turkey cooking in the oven. You walk in there, the guy's falling down drunk on the wine you gave him. He's drinking the wine. He's not using it on the turkey. What happened with string theory is Kaluza and Klein showed that if you added a thumb to the hand of space-time, that suddenly you could do all this stuff. String theory decided to add some more thumbs, hoping that would help. They grew another small thumb on one of the other thumbs, and it's produced nothing. It is completely mental masturbation at this point. But just
maybe
the
that's
way
on
science,
purpose.
here's what Einstein said after he'd been at the Institute for Advanced Study. Okay, he's at the Institute for Advanced Study. He goes through World War II. He's there when they tell him they dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. He says, oy vey, how terrible. But he's still working on his unified field theory. But he doesn't like quantum mechanics, so he's not making any progress. Quantum mechanics turns out is key. They get a new director at the Institute for Advanced Study. Guess who it is? It's Robert Oppenheimer. And call it whatever you like. Two roosters in the same hen yard? They don't get along at all. Einstein tells friends, he says, ever since Oppenheimer got here, they've been telling me to quit working on unified field theory. He thinks, he thinks I'm trying to invent anti-gravity. Why would I want to do that? He told me to quit working on it, work on something else. He says, I don't understand it. Being Einstein, he probably did understand it. Oppenheimer runs around saying, Einstein, Schmeinstein, he's nothing but an old fool. Yeah, he did some stuff when he was young, but what has he done for us lately? Oppenheimer spent the last 10 years of his career and of his life running the Institute for Advanced Study, basically pissing on everybody else's ideas. Feynman, Dick Feynman invented quantum electromagnetism.
Mm-hmm.
And also solved the Challenger thing. He was the guy who solved the Challenger disaster for us. Oh, he came and gave a talk at Princeton Institute. Oppenheimer's sitting there in the audience just giving him raspberries. Finally, one of the other scientists, another Nobel Prize winner, turns to Oppenheimer and says, shut the bleep up. Let him finish. Yeah. Oppenheimer went from leader of American science to being its goalkeeper. He didn't want people making scientific advances. Maybe it was guilt over Hiroshima, who knows? They invited finally the guys from the Manhattan Project, including Oppenheimer, he was the head of it, to the White House. Here's Harry Truman. He's from Missouri. Harry Truman was a combat veteran of World War I. He was commander of an artillery battery. And we're talking somebody who went through intense combat. I don't know what the audience knows about running an artillery battery. If the other enemy, in this case the Germans, get the range on your battery, you're getting shelled. He said at one battle, and the American troops were green, they hadn't been in combat before. They're shelling the German lines, and the Germans figure out where they are, start shelling them back. his troops started to break and run. They started to abandon their guns and run because there's shells busting up all over them. People are dying of shrapnel. Truman had to stop them from running. They didn't say he pulled a gun, but what he did do, he started cursing them, saying, if your mothers could see you now, what would they think? He shamed them back to their guns. They asked him later, how come you didn't run? He says, I was so scared, my legs wouldn't work, he says. I mean, he went through intense combat. And so there he is in the White House. He gets all these scientists in from Manhattan Project. He's giving them all medals. He's going down the row, shaking their hand, giving them a medal, you know. He gets to Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer looks all long in the face. Truman, being very plain spoken, said, what the hell's wrong with you? You look like you're at a funeral instead of getting an award. You know, you probably saved 1 million American troops from invading Japan, and probably 50 million Japanese women and children from getting killed in the fighting. And Oppenheimer just says, I feel like I got blood on my hands, sir, because of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Truman leans close to him and says, you invented the bomb. I dropped it. He says, get out of this office. And he told his aides, he says, don't ever let this dumb son of a bitch back in the White House ever again. So then he went to Institute for Advanced Study and ran that place. You know, he was a famous guy. And but he didn't get along with Einstein or anybody else. He basically didn't want any scientific progress after that. Interesting.
Now going back
Yeah.
to some of this technology, anti-gravity, where does Hans Kammler fit in all this?
Okay. Now, according to the theory I worked out, and I will be perfectly honest, I saw a paper by 2 Japanese guys. And then by coincidence was informed that a Russian paper said the same thing. This is like 1990, like 1989. And 2 Japanese physicists noticed that if you took Tesla rotating fields, same fields that rotate, you know, 3-phase power, same things that they use to spin gyroscopes in airplanes, and also it's the principle of the induction motor, where you have a rotating electromagnetic field and you put a piece of metal in there, it spins with the field. And so it doesn't need any any commutator brushes. All it needs, which always wear out, all it needs is just good bearings. The motor will last. So Tesla invented the induction motor using this 3-phase power. And if you drive by power lines, you'll see they come in groups of 3. We're talking the power lines that are on the big ceramic insulators. There's always groups of 3. They also have another line usually on top of the towers. That's ground. That's to stop lightning. But drive by, next time you see a big high voltage power line, notice it's in groups of 3. And sometimes the groups of 3, they got 3 subgroups in them. Okay, that's a rotating field. I call it a Tesla vortex because it sounds cool. But that's what it is. It's a vortex of electromagnetism. So these Japanese guys noticed that when they took an aviation gyroscope, spinning disc of aluminum in this three-phase fields, and they put it on a very sensitive chemical scale, and they spun up the gyroscope, it would lose weight. Faster they spun it, the more weight it would lose, which meant higher frequency fields. So they published that. As it turns out, that I was made aware that a Russian paper said exactly the same thing. And here's the peculiar thing. If you take your thumb, once again, the thumb and the fingers wrap around, that's the direction of rotation. The spin axis is a vector, and it goes in the direction of the thumb. That's called the right-hand rule. When you run this gyroscope, so it's, let's see, yeah, it would go counterclockwise, spin vector up, it would lose weight. If you flip the fields around, so spin vector was pointing down, it did nothing. Rather than gaining weight, no, it did nothing in the opposite direction, only spin up. So they tried it with brass and aluminum, various rotors, and they got this published in a very prominent scientific journal. So we heard about it. We also heard about the Russian paper. We got some money from an entrepreneur to reproduce the experiment as exactly as we could. We did so. We got the same effect. So I have this gem theory already. So I figured out, using the gem theory, how to express this all mathematically. So when you create a Tesla vortex with 3 coils, then, by the way, we got aviation gyroscopes, but the bearings were wearing out. They were old. So we took out the rotor just to see what would happen. The effect increased, became more powerful without the rotor. And the chemical scales we were using were sensitive, but they'd had sensitive chemical scales like that around at universities in Europe since the 40s. Apparently, the Germans discovered this. So they developed a German anti-gravity program. By the way, and you'll love this. So the Japanese published this in this big scientific journal, and there was the Russian paper saying the same thing. We found the same effect that they found. Somebody else publishes a paper saying they repeated the gyroscope experiment and got nothing. The people.
Let me guess. Is this the University of Colorado?
This is the University of Colorado, where we got the Condon report from the UFO stuff, saying, it's nothing here to see. Move along, folks. Nothing here to see. You know what they did? They took a gyroscope run by compressed air, not electromagnetism. They didn't
probably deliberately.
Deliberately. They knew just exactly what they were doing. They were trying to discredit the Japanese work and the Russian work using compressed air. We reproduced exactly what the Russians and the Japanese reported. We got the same result as they did. So you can create electromagnetism in a vortex using Tesla fields, and it will start to weaken gravity in that field. Now, our experiments, the gravity, the weight, things like weight about 100 grams, they would lose 10 milligrams, hardly any. I told people at where I work, don't pack your bags for Mars just yet. There's a few things. So obviously you had to improve on this effect. And we weren't allowed to do it. As soon as we verified the effect existed, our money got stopped. Somebody talked to somebody and they shut us down. We were actually doing a classified experiment and we didn't realize it.
Why would they shut something like that down?
Because it's classified. It's like, you discover you can slap two pieces of uranium together and they get really hot. You realize, gee, the bigger the pieces of uranium I slap together, the hotter they get. And then the government shows up, taps you on the shoulder. Hey, I'm a defense contractor. And I'm a very loyal citizen.
Mm-hmm.
And this has happened to me before, by the way. I got a great idea from writing a science fiction story. And I realized, oh, I could build one of these things. So I built it. And it worked. And I've ended up getting about $1 million worth of research money from the Air Force to develop the idea further. And then one day, Air Force officer shows up and says, Dr. Brandenburg, I'm sorry, you can't work on this anymore. And I can't tell you why. So I said, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I'd like another. No, the program went black. They liked my invention so much and they tried it themselves, and apparently it worked for them too. The program went black. Went out to the skunk works or something. Who the hell knows?
But what's this got to do with Hans Kammler?
Ah, so interesting. Hans Kammler. Okay, so the Germans, because of Einstein, everybody's talking about unified field theory.
Mm-hmm.
Unifying gravity and electromagnetism. So not only can you can bend light with gravity, but you can also bend gravity with light. You can have anti-gravity. It becomes a two-way street instead of a one-way street. So Einstein leaves. The Germans want to develop this into a new type of aircraft, anti-gravity aircraft. They call it the Hanabu program, which means discus. From the ancient Greek Olympics, they would toss the discus. And so there's this guy named Hans Kammler. He is a very, very capable engineer and administrator. He's also a dedicated psychopathic Nazi. This guy builds Auschwitz, the death camp, down to the detail. How big to build the ovens and poison gas chambers, all of that stuff. He designs that. He runs it for a while. They put him in charge of their jet fighter program to put out jet fighters to try and win the war. They put him in charge of their wonder weapon program. They put him in charge of the V2. He goes and the British figured out where they were building the V2. They bombed it. A place called Peenemünde. Speer, who's the German Minister of Armaments, says, we got to move this thing underground, move the factory to make the V2s underground. So they hollow out this mountain using slave labor. They set up a factory in there to build V2s. For every V2 they built there, 2 slave laborers died. We're talking mass deaths. It's a place called Nordhausen. American troops arrive and liberate the place and liberate the, it's supposed to be the Russian occupation zone, but the Americans got there first. And so when the Russians got there was nothing but bare walls. all the V2 parts had disappeared, along with Werner von Braun. Werner von Braun worked for Hans Kammler. Hans Kammler is now put in charge of what they think is a war-winning technology. And by the way, give you some idea of how much money the Nazis spent on these weapons. They spent more on the V2 program to make the V2 than we spent on the Manhattan Project. Now, the Germans are fighting the Russians on the Russian front, and by that time, they're fighting the Americans, British, and Canadians on the Western front. They're getting bombed all the time. They still managed this Manhattan-style program to build V2s so they could kill a few thousand people in London with the V2s. Okay. Hans Kammler is now put in charge of a new program, reportedly. Program to make anti-gravity using this three-phase effect, the Tesla vortex. He sets up an experimental area in these old mine shafts in a place called Silesia. It's in Poland now. These mine shafts are poorly ventilated. What they do is they put liquid mercury in these pointing vortex fields and spin it. And supposedly this makes very strong anti-gravity. Oh, there's another problem though. The mercury gets hot when you spin it with these Tesla fields. It evaporates. Guess what? Down in the tunnels, all your experimental staff, they go mad as hatters. Watch Alice in Wonderland. There. The Mad Hatter, that was mercury poisoning. So they run through staff pretty quick there.
Mm-hmm.
The Russian army artillery can be heard in the distance. Hans Kammler, being a psychopathic Nazi, is also a smart guy and starts wondering, where can I retire when this war is over? So he has his experimental staff write a big report on all the progress they made on anti-gravity. They turn in the report to his office. He orders his SS security to take out all of the staff to a field and shoot them in mass, buried them in a mass grave. He didn't want anybody talking to the Russians. He takes the report and offers it to the Americans doing paperclip. This is what the reports are. By this time, everybody is looking for Mr. Hans Kammler. British intelligence, American intelligence, but nobody can find him. Apparently, he traded that report for a nice office in the United States to work on anti-gravity. So that's where the US got its own anti-gravity program, courtesy of Hans Kammler. Because nobody could find him after the war ended.
And I don't think the US has officially admitted that they settled him here. It's been a big mystery.
It's reported. It is reported that he was he died in the United States. I thought he had died in Argentina. No, he's too valuable to send to Argentina. They got him a nice place to live in the United States. And so that's where the US got its anti-gravity program. Now, when you do the gem theory to design a flying saucer to fly with its anti-gravity using this pointing, it's called the Tesla vortex, you get a dish, and on the bottom of the dish is 3 bumps. Those are the Tesla inductors, 1 for each phase. And that's just what the Hannibal saucers, Hannibal 2, you can look them up. That's just what they look like. A dish with 3 bumps on the bottom. That wasn't the Hannibal 1. The Hannibal 1, apparently the bottom was just flat, probably because they had the three-phase inductors stuck inside. But the final version had 3 bumps, and you can actually go higher than 3. You can go 4 or 5, how many you want, as long as everything rotates. The fields rotate, but the 3 inductor is the simplest, and of course then the lightest. So, and if you look at the Adamski saucers, that's what they look like. They look like a dish, metal dish with 3 bumps on the bottom. So the United States government knows how to make anti-gravity. It learned it from the Germans. And that's classified still. Now,
and why is it classified? I mean, why have they held on to it for all these years?
oh, well, because it looks like a flying saucer, and they don't want people putting 2 and 2 together, saying, "Gee, are some of those saucers ours? Are some of them from outer space, etc." But that's the basic craft you get, is a saucer with 3 bumps on the bottom, or more, 3 or more. You can always run it with more. And so it has been done. The DARPA, the Advanced Research Program, asked me to write a big report on my gem theory. Fortunately, the person at DARPA who asked me for the detailed report, they gave me 200 grand to write this, basically to smooth out the theory, rough edges. There's always rough edges on these theories. So I smoothed it out, made it work really good. I handed in my report. Fortunately, the guy at DARPA was not named Kamler. And they basically said, "Thank you, Dr. Brandenburg. Don't let the door hit you on the way out of the building." They basically wanted to know what I knew.
Mm-hmm.
Also, when they gave me the money to do the research, they made a very peculiar request. They said, "Dr. Brandenburg, we're giving you this money to do pure theory. Repeat after me. Pure theory. Don't do any experiments." I said, "Yes, sir. Please sign my check so I can get to work." I knew the score. If I did experiments, it would basically start becoming classified. And I could end up getting a one-way bus ticket to Site 51 to work with the little short gray guys. Who the hell knows? So basically, Uncle Sammy knows about anti-gravity, using the full faith and credit of the Third Reich. Well, I mean, it's the same way we got our rockets things that went to the moon from Werner von Braun. Germans did a lot of work for us, and they were good. Now, Hans Kammler should have been hung, but instead he was too useful. So they brought him to the United States, and he apparently lived out the rest of his life there. Nobody knows what happened to him. So they know he disappeared from
Well, I'm sure
Europe.
somebody knows. I'm sure somebody knows.
Somebody knows. So anyway, so our government knows a lot more. It's got a lot of cards it's not showing. I think basically the UFO cover-up is considered the most important thing. The fact that we have anti-gravity, that's considered important, but they'd much rather, they don't want people to know that we have a theory for flying saucers, because that would make flying saucers real, right? So they keep that quiet. But I predict sometime within the next 10 years at air shows around the country where you'll have flights of the Thunderbirds, suddenly they'll trot out our own flying saucers. They'll overfly the runway, and they'll say, "Look what we can do now." Actually, we've had them for probably 40 years. I mean, they threw like $10 billion at this problem. They got it to work.
What the heck? What the hell do they use it for?
To chase alien UFOs, apparently. We let them know we're in town. Yeah. The whole UFO cover up and the rationale for that, that's a whole nother talk. I will just say that right now we have anti-gravity. Uncle Sammy has it as an ace up his sleeve. That's good. I hope that my theory actually helped people at Site 51 to improve what they had. I really do. Right now, what we really need is something to power it. In my imagination, I've constructed what an anti-gravity craft would look like using present technology. And basically, it uses a jet turbo generator to generate the fields.
Mm-hmm.
And what they do, they build it out of the lightest possible composites they can. It's got a jet turbo generator. They deflect. So part of the jet turbine is running the turbo alternator to make the three-phase fields for the anti-gravity. They take the exhaust turbine and point it down to give more lift. Not only that, the top of the craft is curved like a big wing. You get it moving fast enough, you get aerodynamic lift. So the craft we have probably fly with a combination of aerodynamic lift, thrust from the jet turbine, turbo alternator, and anti-gravity. Now, what we need is fusion power to power this so we can go into outer space, because of course your turbo alternator won't work in outer space anymore. You could carry liquid oxygen and methane or something into space, but that's heavy. If you're running everything on tight margins, you don't want that. You want nuclear power that is light and fast and compact. And that means you want fusion power.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've been working on fusion power ever since I was in graduate school. I remember I had the unique pleasure of raising two kids by myself. I remember sending them off to high school. And before I sent them off to high school, one was a freshman, one was a sophomore. I said, "You kids, you're going to be in high school. You're starting as freshman and sophomore. By the time you guys are seniors, you're going to be adults." I said, "I want you to observe in your classes the mistakes other high school students are making, because some of them will total their lives out. They'll get on drugs. They'll do whatever. They'll get in they'll steal cars. Learn from their mistakes. Don't make the mistakes yourself. Learn from and that's how I got through high school. I had a goal. I wanted to be a scientist. My uncle, Will, God rest his soul, worked on the Manhattan Project. He taught me all sorts of physics when I was a kid. And so I've learned from watching the whole fusion research thing from the mistakes of others. Now, right now, we have a device that works pretty well. It was invented by the Russian Sakharov, who was the father of the Russian hydrogen bomb. Named Sakharov. And it is called the tokamak. The tokamak works, but it's big and bulky and complicated. I like to say the tokamak is the wet dream of any administrator because it means you have to have a big program with lots of buildings, big parking lots with lots of employees. You can't make a tokamak work when it's small. It's got to be big. I mean, they're building what's called the Eater in France. It's well named because it's eating up all the budget. It is the ultimate spruce goose of science. That thing is never, it will eventually fly 5 feet above the ocean surface and then touch down and go back to the hangar and never fly again. They have been working on that, the Eater, since the 90s. That's 30 years. Part of the fusion problem, guys, and I hate to break it to you, but the fossil fuel industry on this planet is the biggest, most powerful industry on Earth. Imagine Saudi Arabia. They have two nightmares. One is Iran across the Persian Gulf taken over. But their worst nightmare is not that, it's that the Americans will discover how to have fusion power and all their oil will become worthless.
Now, here's a question for you.
Yes.
From,
what have we learned?
Gondolf. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. What have we learned from the alien crash retrieval, reverse engineering toward this end? Oh, I think they learned a lot of stuff about materials, details of engineering. Look at an airplane wing. You know, the Wright brothers got their airplane flying by copying bird wings. The Germans figured out the actual Bernoulli equation, how to make that work and design good airplane wings, and they improved them and improved them. We've done the same thing. Oh, and then the Allies from some crashed Fokker D7s figured out what the Germans figured out. So we copied it. They made the Sopwith Camel, which was better than the D7. Sopwith Camel took down Richthofen, Baron Richthofen, the Red Baron. So you learn, if you're smart, you learn from the mistakes of others. In this case, the aliens crash their ships, or they're shot down. The government doesn't like to talk about that. Some of these crashes, well, what caused the alien ships to crash? Oh, they were flying in a thunderstorm. And we say, well, gosh, American airliners fly in thunderstorms all the time. They get hit by lightning. It doesn't hurt them at all. Lightning just runs on the surface of the plane and jumps off the other side. You know, it's a common and harmless occurrence. And then they say, well, maybe they flew into a radar beam. I mean, if you look at the history of the Foo Fighters, they were flying around since 1942. Radars got better and better and better. There was no record of any crash retrievals in World War II. That happened at Roswell.
Didn't they? What about Camp Girardeau, though? Didn't they find some?
Oh, well, yeah, that Camp Girardeau in Missouri. By the way, Harry Truman was a third-degree Mason. The Masons in Missouri knew everything that happened there. They were a secret network of intelligence sharing. That means that whatever happened at Cape Girardeau, the Masons knew it. And Truman knew it. They can't figure out why Truman was selected. He was just a hack politician from Missouri. How did he end up getting to be vice president under Roosevelt? I think he was picked because he was a combat veteran and he knew about Cape Girardeau. After Cape Girardeau, the US government knew there were aliens from outer space coming here to visit this planet. And so then I'm going to try to avoid going off on tangents, but I'll just say we know from reports there wasn't just one crash at Roswell. There were two crashes. One crash, or it was a debris field, was apparently from a ship that exploded in midair. It was a debris field. That's where they found bodies of the aliens. There were two debris fields. Max Brazel found the first debris field. When they investigated, they found a second debris field that had the bodies in it. The other crash occurred about 100 miles to the west at a place near a place called Socorro. It's called the Plains of San Agustin. Now, the craft that went down near Roswell, or near Corona, they say, didn't even get detected for like 4 or 5 days. We had the spectacle, by the way, of vultures and coyotes chewing on the alien bodies. They say they interviewed the vultures and the coyotes and asked them, what do the aliens taste like? They said, filet mignon with a mixture of caviar. You ask them what humans taste like. Humans taste like pork, they said. So anyway, so there was a crash near Corona, or debris field from something that exploded in midair. The crash that happened at the Plains of San Agustin, and this apparently happened on the morning of July 4th. It was recovered, or July 5th. Had a big hole in it, and full of dead aliens, and dead aliens out on the ground. It had crashed, had a big hole in it. People say, oh, it was brought down by radar beams, or was struck by lightning. No. Let me put it this way. Radar beams do not make holes in things or make stuff blow up in midair. Not unless it's like the Hindenburg, made out of hydrogen. I always remember the Hindenburg because it rhymes with my name. So unless the thing is full of hydrogen, radar beams are not going to make it blow up. Lightning bolts hit airliners all the time. And are you trying to tell me that somebody who comes 100 light years to here doesn't know about lightning? There's lightning on Jupiter, on Venus, on Earth. They've been flying around since 1942 on Earth, watching the war. Foo Fighters. So I'm going to leave that as an open question for some other night. What did bring down the two craft near Roswell? If it wasn't lightning and it wasn't radar. Maybe they ran into each other. Who knows? Maybe one of the alien crews was not paying attention to the things. That, like I said, we'll save that for another show. We're just about out of time here.
No, we still have plenty of time. We still have 26 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll just leave that for a little another discussion. So, I heard some great stories when I was working in Washington, D.C. You'll love these stories. One of my favorite stories is this. near Fort Dix, New Jersey in 1979. Fort Dix, New Jersey is surrounded by oak forest. It's a military post out in the middle of an big oak forest. So in 1979, somebody calls up the Army base at Fort Dix and says, "Hey," and they've been seeing a lot of flying saucers. So they said, "There's a flying saucer hovering over this place in the woods near your base. We thought you might want to know about this." So the guys in Fort Dix, people have been seeing a lot of UFOs. So they got two squads of MPs and put them in some Jeeps, and they headed out into the woods to where the location of this supposed thing was. They get near it. There's a clearing, and there's a flying saucer hovering over this clearing in the woods. Clearings in a forest like that are generally where there used to be a lake, and then it fills in, finally becomes a meadow, finally it gets more oak trees. On the ground beneath the saucer are 4 aliens. 4 short little gray guys. By the way, the little gray guys look like they're really brainy. Their heads are the same size as ours. So their bodies are so short and scrawny, they look like they're really got a lot of brains. But so the MPs stop their Jeeps in shock. And then the commander says, "Well, let's go get them." So they drive these Jeeps out into this clearing to get to these 4 aliens that are on the ground. The saucer hovering over them takes off and leaves them. I thought only humans did stuff like that. No, this was a classic FUBAR operation by the aliens. The saucer takes off, disappears into the sky, leaves the landing party on the ground, and they got these Jeeps coming across the meadow at them. They run for the woods in 4 different directions, and they're short little gray guys, and they're running like scared chickens. They lose them in the woods. The MPs can't find them. They chase them into the woods. And, after a while, after about 45 minutes, they just say, "Okay, they got away. Let's go back home and file a report and beer call." All in a day's work. So they go back to base and they file a report. 4 days later, 4 days, out of the woods towards one of the guard shacks at the Fort Dix perimeter comes this hungry, lost, very tired alien, comes wandering out of the woods on the road and tries to surrender to the Army. The guard at the guard shack takes one look at him, panics, pulls out his .38 and plugs him. So he's dead. So, this was a classic double FUBAR. One FUBAR by the aliens, one FUBAR by the United States. So when you hear about the Fort Dix incident in 1979, all you hear about is the alien walking up to the guard shack and getting shot. You don't hear about the preliminary. Oh, there's another great one. The Navy was testing their Polaris and Poseidon missiles. So they put up this big, powerful radar on like Johnson Island or Kwajalein or something. And it's to track the warheads coming in from outer space on their trajectories. They want to get a precise, trajectory on them. It's just very powerful radar. They switch it on. Within a couple days, they get reports of a crashed UFO on a nearby island. And a day later, another crash. 3 UFOs in a row apparently flew into the big radar beam. It was like a giant bug zapper. And I mean, this is very powerful radar. They were putting as much juice out of that thing as they could. So apparently the Navy had so many alien bodies, they just said, we don't need any more. And these things are, apparently the alien bodies get ripe really quick. That's what all I'm reporting is what I heard.
Mm-hmm.
The little gray guys, they get ripe really quick. So you either got to freeze them in liquid nitrogen, or they just took them out and buried them. They said, well, we got plenty of alien bodies already. Just bury them. They probably burned them and then buried them, buried the ashes. And they took all of the hardware, of course, and sent it to wherever the Navy sends those things. If it's the Air Force, it goes to Wright-Patterson. But the Navy, who knows where it goes. So we're dealing with people from outer space who not only, like the intelligent species we love and know ourselves, do colossal miscalculations and screw-ups. I'll tell you another conversation I had that was very interesting in Washington, D.C. I'm sitting there in an office working in a classified facility. It's a SCIF. They call it a SCIF, a secure facility. And I'm working in this office. We're working on some kind of space problem, watching Russian missile tests or something,
Mm-hmm.
And this guy walks into my office, and I've been working with him for 6 months. I know him to be a solid, very respected professional. Because of my Mars work, people I noticed would confide in me about this UFO stuff because they figured I understood that we weren't alone in the universe, that it wasn't a big shock to me. The guy comes into my office. He's standing there in front of my desk, and I said, hey, Bill, how can I help you? He says, John. He shuts the door behind him. He says, John, I was talking to some guys in another program, and they're really worried that there are aliens down here on Earth who look and act and smell just like human beings. And they can't tell them from, terrestrials. They're basically human beings, but they're not, they're from outer space. And they're worried about this security problem because some of them may be getting clearances and being classified programs. And he said, the question I got for you, have you got any ideas how we could tell these people from human beings? And I had been putting together the idea of a science fiction novel about this. And I said, canine units, get some trained German shepherds. They'll sniff them out. They'll be able to tell if they're from outer space or not. And the guy's face just melts into this smile, big smile. And he says, oh, that's a great idea. I'm going to go tell these guys. So he leaves. I go back to, I thought, is this a real conversation? So he leaves. A week later, he comes back into my office the same way with a big grin on his face. He says, John, I told the guys I was talking to your idea, and they really like it, and they're going to try it. So that conversation occurred in about 1989. Now, also with facial recognition software, they can probably tell, and if you want to, and by the way, this is a gross oversimplification. The universe is a complicated place, just like the Earth is. Just accept that. I know that. But just like on Earth, the human race comes in 3 different colors and 2 sexes. I mean, that's an gross oversimplification, but it's basically a description. Now, as it turns out, in our celestial neighborhood, there are three basic types that we're dealing with. There are the grays, of course. They make up the majority of the reports of crash body retrievals, and abductions, animal mutilations, human mutilations. Those are the little gray guys. Then there's another group, which is much rarer. Reports are they were first encountered in Vietnam in the DMZ, and they're basically lizard men. They look like projections of what dinosaurs would look like if they developed a humanoid dinosaur that walked on its hind legs, short tail, big brain. And you look at the Gorn from Star Trek, where Captain Kirk had to end up in a fight with this lizard man on this planet. Okay, so that's another type. Those are supposedly about 7 feet tall, quite formidable in Vietnam, they said. And they apparently would run into them on patrol in the DMZ. But I've never heard of any of them being recovered from any crashes. So they're rare. Then, of course, there's some that supposedly look like praying mantises, but I think that's basically part of the gray basic type, variation on the grays. Big eyes, looks like an insect. The grays are basically insectoid, like social insects. And so the third category of aliens is best understood by watching a movie from Walt Disney in 1962 called Moon Pilot. It's a woman with auburn hair, brown eyes, who befriends this astronaut who's supposed to go up and do a figure 8 around the moon and come back to Earth, played by Bob Tyrone, I believe. This woman's a real babe. She's not from here. She's Lyrian. But the story is that the Pleiadians, also called the Nordics, but I mean this chick had brown hair and brown eyes, not blonde hair and blue eyes. But the Pleiadians look just like us. In fact, we actually look like them because they predate us. We are apparently part of a larger genotype among the stars that you could call Pleiadian, Lyrian, or just Pleiadian. Supposedly, the story goes that the people in the what we call Pleiadians, lived in the constellation Lyra, which is right next to the North Pole, next to the constellation Draco, the dragon. And they got in a big fight with the Draconians from the constellation Draco, the lizard men. And they didn't do so well. So they had to evacuate, and it was probably something like Battlestar Galactica, the original. They had to evacuate. They probably lost 90% of their population. And they came and found a place near the Pleiades. The Pleiades are blue stars. They're not good stars to live near, but they're surrounded by ordinary stars like ours. You just can't see them very well because the blue stars shine more brightly. But anyway, they ended up near the Pleiades, but they have a beef with the Draconians. Now, the Pleiadians build starships that are even apparently more powerful and faster than the Greys. They don't get along with the Draconians. And that is the source, by the way, of the idea of reptiles of dragons. being very smart and very powerful and very dangerous. St. George and the Dragon, also the Adam and Eve story. Adam and Eve lost their original garden they lived in because of an intelligent reptile. This is like the Pleiadians being kicked out of Lyra and ended up near the Pleiades. They lost their original home because of these draconians. So the Pleiadians like us, and they're helping us. There. So we have two enemies out there. We have the draconians and the grays, basically enemies. And then, I'm sure there's some grays that are friendly to us. Who knows? The universe is a complicated place. And then we have the Pleiadians. Probably, remember Star Trek, a lot of the aliens were very human. And they even talked about that in Star Trek. They said, it's like the whole cosmos was seeded with human type species. I mean, the Vulcans were humanoid, the Romulans were humanoid, so were the Klingons in the original series. The Bajorans, and like the Vulcans and the humans got along just great. The Klingons, not so much. Hey, somebody lands at a spaceship and looks like me. Am I going to trust him? Well, I'll invite him in for coffee, but I'd like to hear his story first before I decide to sell him my car. You know what I mean?
Don, how did you get all this information over all these years? Like, what were they telling? Is most of this
I've been doing
in Washington?
Stuff, yeah. Washington. It started in Washington, but I picked up a lot of stuff later. Quite frankly, I worked with the Pentagon and the agencies, and they would tell me stuff because of my Mars work. Completely independently, by the way, of any UFO sightings, we found a dead civilization on Mars. Guess what the faces of we have we have three well-defined carvings of faces on Mars. One at the face at Cydonia, the other two at a place called Galaxis Chaos. They don't look like dragons. They don't look like grays. They look like us. And they predate stuff on Mars. Predates us probably about 100 million years at least. They're from before the dinosaurs. So anyway, we have kindred in the stars. We have kindred, and blood is thicker than water. They're apparently helping us. The reason we probably still have a civilization that's independent is because of the Pleiadians.
If we are, though, why hasn't anyone told us about this stuff officially?
Well, like the movie Moon Pilot, they're just, and Star Trek, it's just they're basically bringing us up to speed. They're taking their good time doing it. One of the really terrible things also, if you watch the Hollywood movies, one of the there were two really good Hollywood movies that speak to all of this that we found out. One was The Thing from Another World with James Arness as the alien. It depicts the first animal mutilations and human mutilations, and the alien drinks blood for sustenance. By the way, that first appeared in the novel War of the Worlds, which talked about a devastating invasion from outer space by mass murdering, blood-sucking aliens.
Mm-hmm.
That's in the original War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. So in 1951, shortly after Roswell, they released The Thing from Another World. Later, in about 1958, they release Earth versus the Flying Saucers, which shows them shooting down flying saucers. Shows the first space satellites, and they hadn't been launched yet. It was pre-Sputnik, but they have them launching satellites into space, and, and they shoot down the aliens with these electromagnetic pulse weapons. And then there's another movie, it's one of my favorites, made in 1957, The Mysterians. It's made by the same outfit that made the Godzilla movies in Japan. It's in Technicolor. It shows these hot Japanese women being abducted into flying saucers, human-alien hybridization experiments, underground alien bases, lavish use of directed energy weapons by both the aliens and the humans. The humans are quick learners in that movie. And finally, human traitors who are so beguiled by the alien technology, they decide to switch sides and make their allegiance to the aliens. But women being abducted into flying saucers is seen in The Mysterians. So I would recommend it to everybody. You can watch it free on the net. Great movie. Beautiful Japanese actresses too. So, now, of course, they came out with E.T. the Extraterrestrial and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. This is kind of the counterculture types in, Spielberg made those counterculture types. And he, we're making nice with the aliens, By the way, in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, they depict the aliens as terrorizing people. But anyway, they have this nice meeting at the end at the St. Mesa in the Devil's Tower in Wyoming. Okay, well, then he makes E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Space Brothers. Then apparently Spielberg decided to get serious and really study the UFO situation. And somebody brought him up to speed, just like I was brought up to speed. So he makes War of the Worlds. You watch War of the Worlds, the aliens are mass murdering bloodsuckers, just like in the original War of the Worlds, and just like in The Thing from Outer Space. So the real core of the cover-up is we are threatened with we have a Cold War going with people from outer space. That's what it truly means. And
but who? Like, how many people really know what's truly going on?
Oh, I don't know. And it's so compartmentalized. In my novel, Morning Star Pass, The Collapse of the UFO Cover-Up, I have the nightmare scenario of that the ruling council of people who are supposed to deal with the aliens has decided to switch sides. They're working for the aliens. But the system is so compartmentalized, nobody realizes that. I mean, the special forces who are military are supporting the UFO cover-up. They start getting all these strange orders. And they can't understand it. So, they're just utterly confused. They said, what's wrong? All they can do, the head of their special forces detachment called the Operation Dark Carnival. When they shoot down a UFO, the Dark Carnival troops, special forces, show up, cordon off the area. They storm the saucers, take control of them, and box them up. and ship them out by morning so that nobody sees it. That's their job. And they're experts at fighting the aliens. They're one of the few military units that is actually expert veterans at fighting the aliens, the Greys. And the head of that program, this Air Force general, finally tells his subordinate, this guy named Colonel Schwartzman, Man of Darkness, he says, this program has to end. I don't know what the hell they're doing. He says, they're issuing orders that don't make any sense, you know. So he actually goes to the CIA, the agency, and reports to them. He says, I think the ruling council has gone native. I think they're working for the aliens now. System's so compartmentalized, we can't figure out what the hell they're doing. So everything is stymied and paralyzed until these two women show up. This one Asian and this one blonde, known as Jade and Blondie, two news anchors, and they blow the lid off of everything.
All right, John, I think we're at the top of the hour. Any final words for the audience?
Be optimistic. We're going to get through this with the help of God above and our kindred in the stars, apparently, who are trying to help us, and our own ingenuity and valor. We will get through this. We'll drive the bad aliens out of here, and we'll end up joining the Federation like in Star Trek. That's my vision for the future. It'll happen.
Well, as always.
All right, Sean.
And we'll
always
talk
a pleasure
again
and honor
soon.
to be on your show.
100%.
All right. Okay.